For me, the health challenges started when I was 5. I was a really healthy, rambunctious, fast-paced kid, probably wearing my parents out,
Spirited.
spirited. And I had a little sister, Jillian, who, we would tear it up together and we're best friends. And then suddenly I started having way less energy. And I remember falling asleep on the couch at my mom's work one day. And that was just very unlike me. And I got all of these little, what are called petechiae, like little red dots all over your body. And that's when we knew something was wrong. And they took me into the hospital. At first, I was diagnosed with leukemia, and then they said, actually, it's aplastic anemia, which means if you have cancer, there are bad cells in your bone marrow. For me, there just were no cells. My body was not producing any that it needed to be, and I was diagnosed with very severe aplastic anemia. So even though it's not cancer, it's treated similarly in the sense that the best cure is a matched sibling bone marrow transplant. So we actually had, my parents had a baby through a surrogate, my aunt, in the hopes of creating a bone marrow match. We did not know if she would be a match. It was a
25% chance that any two siblings, but I had infertility treatment to get pregnant with Kinsey and her sister Jillian. And I had frozen embryos, but then because of the BRCA gene, which Kinsey and I both have, I had to have a hysterectomy. So I released those remaining embryos. And I called the clinic and said, "Is there any chance you still have those?" And they said, "No, sorry." And the next day, Mary, the receptionist, called me back and said, "Actually, we found them." So for $2,000 in back storage and shipping, I got them from Albuquerque to Louisville. The shipper came from Minneapolis, way too much detail. But anyway, we got them to Louisville, and my sister was able to get pregnant on the first try. We implanted, not we, but the doctor implanted 4 embryos. We were hoping for twins because that would double the chances of a match. But only one baby took, and she is a perfect match.
So
Wow.
initially, yeah, it's been quite the journey. But initially, I was scheduled to go to transplant in June of 2003
June 30th of 2003.
when I was 6,
How old was the
and
baby?
he was 4 months old at the time. But then I got a
Wow.
cold, yeah, and so they postponed it just a little bit. And in that time, miraculously, my counts stabilized. They still are not exactly sure why, but I had started taking this immune suppressant that maybe is the reason that it stabilized me for a really long time. So we kind of lived the next 22 years waiting for the other shoe to drop, but also living life as fully as we could. I went to college, I got married. My sisters, both grew up and started their own family, or not, my sisters both grew up and started their own lives as adults, and I got to watch Tegan, my perfect match sister, graduate from Butler University in May, and we found out just a few weeks around that time that I would finally need the transplant because at that point my counts had dropped low enough after 22 years that it just wasn't safe to keep living with those counts.
Interestingly enough, Tegan, for her senior project at Butler, did a video called The Perfect Match, having no idea that this might, when she first started working on this project, it was just, yeah, I was born to save my sister, and this, might happen one day. And in the course of between December 2024 and April, uh,
Yeah.
we figured out it was looking likely, and then the timing got narrowed down to summer until, you know,
Until they decided to do it in
Wow.
August. And part of the reason they try to do it in the summer if they can is to keep it out of cold and flu season
Hmm.
because, my most vulnerable weeks have been the past couple of weeks. And so if they can do it in the summer, it's a little bit safer. But the one other big aspect of this that was really emotionally and financially challenging is that if you have a bone marrow transplant, you typically have to go through chemotherapy and radiation, which almost always destroys your fertility. And so when I got radiation 2 weeks ago, it most likely meant that I would not be able to have children going forward, which I've always wanted to be a mom. That was so important to me. And so we were able to do, fortunately, we had enough warning with the transplant that we were able to do IVF this spring and freeze 6 embryos so that hopefully once I'm finally out of treatment and really have a cure, my husband and I would still be able to have children. But that alone was about 20,000 out of pocket that we had to come up with within just a few months. And we had more time than a lot of people do. You know, if you're diagnosed with an aggressive cancer, it's probably a few days or a few weeks. And so my husband drained all of his retirement savings from his first 5 years of working. And I also drained mine from my first job. And I think that was just tough because it felt so unfair. I mean, he's worked since he was 17, never not had a job since then. And just knowing that he was doing this, you know, for us, but also for me because of this illness, and that, you know, that's just yet another huge financial challenge that a lot of people have to go through. And it was tough for us, but we were lucky that we were even able to do it and we had some success. And I just so feel for other patients where they can't do it and they maybe can't start a family or it's going to be more difficult that way. Because also sometimes when you've had a history of cancer or other serious illnesses, it even makes adoption harder because you are sometimes disqualified for that, for like a pre-existing condition. And so it can just be you know, it can add so much additional emotional stress and sadness to already, you know, knowing that you need to fight for your life.
And it was really Kinsey. I mean, she got married a year ago in June, and then began talking about when they might start a family, and sought out the doctor to say, "Is it safe for me at this point to get pregnant?" And that led to further tests, a bone marrow biopsy, further tests, and the determination that actually no, it would absolutely not be safe for you to get pregnant right now for you or the baby, and you really need a bone marrow transplant. So it was that desire to start a family that sort of launched this whole,
Yeah.
we would have gotten there anyway because by the time our counts dropped, other symptoms would have made it
Yeah.
pretty obvious.
Okay, tell me about life. Like, if you tried to live with this, had you not done that testing, what would life start to turn into? And then if you couldn't find a match, ultimately, what happens?
Yeah. So the biggest symptoms with aplastic anemia are you're at very high risk of infection or disease. For example, you know, if I got COVID or as I have twice, you know, it hits you harder. Your body just has less ability to fight any kind of infection. And then the other thing is you can be very low energy if your hemoglobin or your red blood cells, which carry oxygen to your whole body, are low, and you're also at a high risk for bleeds. So you're sort of just, it feels like living in Russian roulette, like something is going to happen eventually that can kill you, but you just don't know exactly when that's going to happen or how. And I did live with all of those symptoms for 22 years and, you know, luckily didn't have a major catastrophe, but I didn't want to keep living like that forever, let alone, you know, put a baby through that type of risk. I just wasn't going to do that.
There were times when, like, Kinsey played field hockey in high school, and her counts would drop low enough that they would say, "You can't play." And I remember one time she got tested, I think on a Thursday, and she begged to get tested again on Monday because they had a big game, and her counts were really hovering around the mark that made it, safe or not safe. And she did get retested, and she was like, 101, like just barely above the marker. And but as the years went by after high school, they continued to drop and drop, where such a thing like playing field hockey would be dangerous. And she always worried about car accidents. If in college, she wore a helmet when she rode her bike, and some of the kids made fun of her, and she's like, "You fall off your bike, you scratch your knee. I fall off, I have a brain bleed, I die." So,
Wow.
I've got to be really careful. So she did live with that fear of infection risk and bleeds predominantly
Yeah, and
for a
definitely
long time.
during the pandemic, I was especially careful. My work was extremely supportive, and I went home to work remotely even before most of the rest of the team did because of my bad immune system. So you just always feel like you're living with more risk, and there just came a point where I knew the transplant was going to be really hard, but I wanted to have that freedom to live the rest of my life with less of that fear. And so we sought out the very best specialist. We found a doctor, Dr. Amy DeZern at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, who is one of the leading experts on this type of transplant. And she has just been wonderful. And so we moved for about 4 months from Kentucky to Baltimore. We're month one into those four, and got my transplant on September 2nd after a couple weeks of chemotherapy. And we were doing pretty well, but I was having really debilitating nausea. And so I just eventually talked to the doctor, and they said, you know, you're not compatible with this first medicine that we tried, and they prescribed a different medicine, the Sancuso patch. And that was a Friday morning. And by the end of Friday, we got the first denial from our insurance company that they weren't going to cover it.
It was literally 5 o'clock on Friday. So we went down to the pharmacy and they said, no, I'm sorry, it was denied. You need prior authorization. So Kinsey's just kind of walking away, and I said, wait a minute, what's the out-of-pocket cost? And he said $711.72. And she said, I'm okay, Mom. It's okay. So we left, and she had a horrible night. I mean, horrible. And I kicked myself over and over. I just bought the damn patch. And I was so angry. I put a post on social media, and friends started reaching out saying, I'll sponsor a day, I'll sponsor a day. And then Suzanne started the GoFundMe. And the next day, we called the insurance company. We got a recording saying, call back during regular business hours. We just bought the patch. And then we started talking to social workers and,
Other patients.
other folks, just trying to figure out, and, week to week, because the patch only lasts 1 week. But it works beautifully. And she has had such, I mean, bone marrow transplant is tough. It is tough. It, hurts your body in so many ways. And this is the first time she has sat up, other than in a hospital bed, in 6 days.
Yeah.
And I promise you, when this is over, she's probably going to collapse. But it has been hard on her. High fevers, 102, 103 consistently, and rigors sometimes where she's just, shaking uncontrollably, pain in her throat and inside her mouth, difficulty swallowing. And she has to swallow 20, what is it now?
At least I think 21 pills a day. So
Oh my God.
yeah.
And what about the isolation? Can you tell me like a little bit about that? Because obviously you're separated from your husband for 4 months.
Yeah. I've not seen my husband in a month and won't probably for another 2 or 3 months at least. Because when you have such a weak and new immune system, you really can't be around anyone. Yeah, we have to
We
wear
don't leave this
N95.
room without a mask on. Even when
So,
other people come into the room, I put on a mask.
and so you also, Ren, are completely isolated,
Yeah.
separated from everyone.
I went to get her a birthday cake this morning because today is her birthday. I don't know if you knew that. But I went to get her a birthday cake, and her sister ordered it from Whole Foods, and I show up in my car in a mask. They bring it to the car, it's prepaid, and then I just bring it back to the hospital, wear the mask all the way to the room, and that's how, we have a half a mile trek from the Ullman House where we're staying. It's a place for young cancer patients 15 to 39. Really wonderful, wonderful organization. Can't say enough good about them. And that half mile is all we do every day. And we, again, even at the Ullman House, we have been wearing masks and keeping our distance. So I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Somebody's at her door.
And the tough part about the isolation is that it's 115 days of complete isolation until I can get my first vaccines. But I'll really be in some form of isolation or just having to be incredibly careful with crowds and even visiting close friends for at least 6 months and really 2 years. I can't get my full vaccination series until, let me think, it'll be August and
27.
well, it's actually 26 months. So I think it'll be October of 2027 when I'm fully recovered.
Is this like
Um,
an infant schedule? Like you're starting
yes,
from
yes.
scratch?
Yeah, starting
Wow.
from scratch. So the
Yeah.
very last one, and I know you have a baby, so
Yeah, I was like, this
the
sounds
very last
familiar.
one, yeah, is the MMR vaccine because it's a live vaccine. You have to get that much later. So, I don't think I'll be in complete isolation for 2 years, but it's a long journey. And so you just hope that when there's something that can help you and makes you feel better, and you're not, it's one less thing you can deal with. You hope that that's easy to get, and if your doctor prescribes it, that it's going to be okay and able to get. And so I think that was what was just really tough for us with this medicine being denied for about 10 days that we had
No,
to delay it. Well, it was two weeks.
10
Yeah,
days.
10 days, but it meant the first two patches were denied. And it just, again, it's frustrating when you're feeling some of the sickest I've ever been in my life and feeling like you've got to fight that battle too, and not wanting, to take on even more debt when we've already spent about $30,000 just this year out of pocket in medical expenses. So trying to keep those down, but also just focus on your survival. I mean, every day has felt like a battle, hour to hour.
Well, and I'll tell you from a mother's perspective, after that first night without the patch, and then we put the patch on her, and she was like a different person. Then when the doctor said, "Well, it looks like they're denying it again. We could try something else." I was like, "No," especially on a Friday, because again, it would have the patch gets replaced on Saturday, so we would have been back in the same dynamic of being and we denied on
Yeah.
Friday the second time, needed to get the patch on Saturday. And if we tried something else and it didn't work, that would have been a long, miserable weekend for her. And she was already at that point with these high
I had
fevers. Yeah,
sepsis
she
for
was
five
septic.
days.
Mhm.
I had a bacterial infection in my
Throughout the,
bloodstream.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we were very fortunate that I think yesterday. Yeah, we're very fortunate that yesterday I got a call that the claim was approved and the medicine will be covered. But what this process taught me is that, for one thing, it still delayed me getting, if I hadn't been able to pay it out of pocket, it still would have delayed me getting this medicine by 10 days, which were some of the sickest of my entire life. And so that alone is a big delay. And it's not the first time that my care has been delayed due to prior authorization. I had an experience in 2023 when I showed up for a doctor's appointment that had been scheduled for weeks. And, I took off work and used a sick day and got to the hospital. And then they said, "I'm so sorry, but we can't actually move forward with this procedure because it hasn't been through the prior authorization process." And I said, "Okay, well, how long will that take?" And they said, "Well, it's a Monday, maybe by Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday." And I said, what am I supposed to tell my boss? Do I just take 4 days off of work, maybe for nothing? What am I supposed to do? And I'm fortunate that I have a job I can sometimes do remotely and a very supportive team, but somebody who's working hourly or is trying to find childcare, I mean, it's just such a difficult hurdle that does not need to be there. If a doctor prescribes something and knows that it's the best for the patient, they should have the final say. It shouldn't be someone else who's never met the patient that has the final say. And so I think even though I had a luckier situation than most and eventually getting this approved, I'm just always thinking about, what is this like for the average person going through it or the person with the least help going through it. And what I've learned is that they just don't have a lot of options. On the call yesterday, I asked, when I found out that it was approved, I said, "Thank you, and I am very, very grateful, but what would your advice be for other patients who are going through this and you're trying to get it approved?" And there was a very long period of silence. And then they said, "Well, they'd have to fail 3 drugs that are preferred. And then if they failed all of those and the doctors submitted the paperwork that they'd failed, or that for some reason they weren't medically compatible, then they might be able to get it approved." And what that translates to is 3 to 4 weeks of additional suffering when, in the most intense phase of your treatment, where you can't get, the thing that your doctor prescribed from the very beginning.
I think I saw a post on that. So had you tried all three of those, by the time you got to the end of it, had they not been working, I mean, that was the time period when you
Well,
needed this patch.
And she had
yeah,
tried one of those.
yeah, I tried one for 10 days, which I had a really bad reaction to and did not work. And for me, the other aspect of it was, I learned from the first failure that the pill form, it didn't even really matter the drug, but the pill form where you get it 2 or 3 times a day, the level fluctuates in your body a lot because it depends on, are you 1 hour away from getting the drug? Are you 8 hours away from getting the drug? How much food do you have in your system at the time? And so I would go through periods of nausea where, at 1:30 p.m. I felt great, but by 1:45 I was gagging and felt like I needed to throw up and had to eat, I called it emergency lasagna to get a little more food. Sometimes I didn't want to eat food because that would make it worse. And so it was not even just the symptom, but every single thought of mine was going to, like, how can I make it through the next hour without throwing up, but still getting some food in my system because, I knew that I needed to eat to be able to fight all of this. And so when they told me, the second and third options would both involve pills or just those spiking and lowering doses, I was very hesitant to try that because, in my view, the method already had failed for me. It wasn't just necessarily about the drug, but we knew that that method just did not work for me. And the doctor prescribed the patch because it would work better and give me a constant dose 24 hours a day. And so that was why I just really felt like that system and standard was not appropriate in this case, especially because I'd already failed one and just shown that that method didn't really work for me.
And let me just echo that she was hesitant and I was adamant. No, we're not doing it because I just wasn't willing to take the risk. I mean, I was the one holding, the throw up bag and watching. It's one thing to be sick, but to see your child go through this and know there's something that can make it so much better. I was gonna get it no matter what. And fortunately, she's got an incredible village, and many people felt that way. Like we want to help, and it's been really heartwarming to see because when she was sick the first time, that $250,000 out of pocket, I mean, it set us back 20 years. And I have been so heartsick to think about that happening to her and her husband, before they even get started. I mean, they were literally married less than 6 months when
Before I relapsed, yeah.
before she relapsed. And I thought, oh my gosh, they'll never be able to buy a house. They'll never be able to even afford to have these babies, which are very expensive through IVF. I mean, it's so tough. So the fact that people were willing to step in there and support her is incredible. But there's so many patients who don't have, I mean, even people who reached out to me and said, why don't you call the media or why don't you do this or that? I'm like, I don't have time right now. I'm in isolation and I am so focused on her and her health is so precarious that I don't have the mental bandwidth to do that. I just got to go buy this patch.
Mhm.
And so, that's how we handled it. And I still think to this day, it would not have been approved for her if she hadn't had some high level advocates who went to bat for her and great folks in the hospital, great folks at her workplace, great folks that we're connected to who made calls and, requested a review. And I think it would still be denied if it weren't for that. We know other patients here who, one of whom said he spent 3 days on the floor, 3 hours, sorry,
Yeah.
one day, 3 hours on the floor, vomiting. And they had prescribed the patch for him, but
It never. In fact, I don't know another patient who's gotten this approved other than me. And I've asked everybody at Johns Hopkins that I know is going through the same thing, if they've had it. And in every case, one, it was denied, and one, it was approved after a month. But again, after a month, you're through the most intense part of the treatment and the month that you really needed it the most. And so I know no one who's gotten it approved immediately. And, for me, I think this was never about, criticizing my insurance company or pharmacy benefit manager. I think overall, I have an amazing plan. They have been very supportive on the whole of this bone marrow transplant, but it's so much bigger than me and it's so much bigger than any one company. It's the whole system, I think, of prior authorization and these middlemen in between the doctors and the patient that mean that the doctors don't get the final say in many cases on what patients should be prescribed. And it's not enough for me that my medicine got approved eventually if other people do not necessarily have that access and are going to continue to get denied.
So, kind of set the scene for me a little bit. If you did not have this incredible fighter of a mom with you, how would you have navigated this? Would you have just left the pharmacy that day, went back to your room, and just suffered?
Yeah, yeah. And I was so, keep in mind, like I was on drugs that day. Like I was not, I think I had just gone through,
Cytoxin.
yeah, high dose Cytoxin, like
Yeah.
the most toxic drug that I think they give you during this process. And I was, it's not that I didn't want to fight it. I just was so out of it and so tired that I literally just thought I just need to get to the car so I can lay down. And I was kind of trying to get her out of there just because of that desperation. So I was in no state at all to be, fighting with at the pharmacy. And she fortunately, I think, had the brain power and the wherewithal to realize how bad this was if that got denied for me. And so she began advocating and has done that so well over the past few days. But the past almost week that I've been in the hospital, I have barely left the room. And like she said earlier, this is the first time I've sat this long out of bed at all.
You only really left the room for an echocardiography or for a
Yeah, I left the room for one other procedure in a wheelchair. So, you
just
know,
yeah.
the thought that patients who don't necessarily have a full-time caregiver, I mean, even the caregivers, I don't think should have to be fighting this on top of
Right.
everything else. But yeah, but the fact that a patient who might have an 104 fever and a bacterial infection and sepsis should be left to fight for a drug that they need at 5 p.m. on a Friday, that is just not realistic and completely unfair. And so I just again I feel very lucky that we eventually got this approved, but the system is just so broken and unfair if that's what patients are expected to do during some of the hardest weeks of their life.
Well, and this drug, the patch does not come in a generic form. The other forms of it do. And so it's more expensive. And in fact, when her doctor came in earlier today, Kinsey asked the question, how long am I going to be on this particular drug, a different one that prevents a certain
Virus.
virus? Right. And she said, it depends. But she said it could be 90 days, it could be
6 months.
6 months. She said, are you asking because it's expensive? Because I know it's really expensive. And she said, no, I was asking because it's really hard to swallow because it's a huge pill. But it was funny. The doctor said, I mean, she gets those questions. And we feel incredibly privileged to be here. I mean, that I have a job, that I can work remotely, that she has a job that's very understanding. I mean, we came to the best place for her particular illness and this procedure, probably in the world. There are people here from all over the world, and we feel incredibly privileged to do that. We feel incredibly privileged to have such a village of support, which I said is great karma. She has, done wonderful things for people throughout her whole life, and they're appreciative of that. But
I wanna ask
I know
about that
people die
too.
every day who can't do that. They just can't do that. And there are people who would just hear the first words, oh, it's going to cost X and give up right there and say, I can't do it.
What do you guys say to everyone back home? Obviously, the GoFundMe started at one amount. It's much higher than anybody imagined. What is your kind of message for everyone back home who was like, "You're not fighting this alone. We're gonna get you through this."
Yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty talkative person and it has left me speechless. I always say Louisville is a really big village and never has that been so true. I mean, we just love our community. I can't wait to get home. And again, it's not just that it was so supportive of me, but our community has allowed my husband to reinvest in his retirement that he had had to completely drain everything since he was 17. And you've changed our life. I mean, to not have medical debt, $30,000 and counting hanging over our heads as we try to start our lives, it's just incredible. And I can't wait to be back. I hopefully will get all my vaccines. I don't know if I can go to the Derby or any Derby festival things for a while, for the next couple of years because of big crowds, but I cannot wait to be home. I do get vaccinated in March, so I'll be able to at least enjoy the celebrations in May, and we just can't wait to get home.
I will say this about the GoFundMe. Two things. One is incredibly appreciative to Suzanne for starting it and to everyone who has contributed to it. And it has not only relieved some of their current medical debt, and now she's paying off current bills that are still owed. We don't know what's ahead. This is a 2-year process. There'll be lots more trips back here. And then we know she has a minimum of 30 or 50,000 in out-of-pocket expenses ahead. But the other thing I want to say that's kind of sweet, she was so sick for 3 days that she had high fever, barely opened her eyes, could barely talk. I mean, just one word answers because she was so sick. She never looked at it. She didn't know what was going on. And when she kind of came around and I told her, Kinsey, this is going to hit $50,000. She was like, what? I mean, just so, and she started crying. And we just cried together because, again, being able to save her and her husband from, what so many people endure, so many people. I mean, bankruptcy, the number one cause is medical debt. I know she's going to fight that fight for the rest of her life. I mean, I said in a post today for her birthday, she's fighting for her own life right now, but she's going to get back full time to fighting for everybody else very soon. And I know this is just giving her even more passion than she already had toward that battle.
And we learned that the number one type of GoFundMe is for medical expenses.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
And
it's just
not this,
amazing. Like
yeah,
the
it
response is
just,
amazing.
It is.
it is amazing, but I also just can't believe that the method we've created to pay for medical expenses is crowdfunding because it's so unbelievably
I
expensive.
know.
It just and for people who can't do that or just it is crazy. But we've learned through this, from so many other families that it's just kind of the only recourse that a lot of people have. So it's made me even more appreciative of our community and excited to come home